Imagine you're running a business. Right. Could be anything. Small startup, huge company. Everything's going great. Sales are up, systems are working, customers seem happy.
The usual smooth sailing.
Then, bam, something goes wrong. Maybe a
Yeah.
server just dies, or the internet for the whole building cuts out, or, something way worse, a fire, a big cyber attack.
Suddenly, you can't get to your data, can't process orders, people can't work. The business just grinds to a halt.
That sudden stop, it's the nightmare scenario, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Keeps a lot of folks awake at night. And it's not just theory. I mean, the impact is immediate, real world. Hits revenue, reputation, everything.
And dealing with that, preventing it or bouncing back from it, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
We're digging into three really key ideas, all connected: availability, resiliency, and disaster recovery.
Yeah, we've got some solid source material here that really lays out the groundwork, the principles, and the, practical steps companies take.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack all that for you, pull out the core ideas, walk you through how businesses actually plan to stay up and running or get back up when things go sideways.
It's about understanding, really, the blueprint for survival. We're moving past just, yeah, you need backups, to grasping the whole strategy. How do you keep things going even when, well, disaster strikes? Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So where do we kick things off? The material starts with availability. Sounds simple, but what does availability actually mean here?
Okay, availability. At its core is pretty straightforward. Can your organization do its job? Can it perform its business functions, meet its goals? Basically, can it operate?
Makes sense. The business has to be available to do business.
Exactly. And while the IT side is obviously huge systems up, data accessible, software running the sources make a good point. Availability isn't just tech.
What else?
It's also about the people. Your human capital. Are the right people available? Are they ready, able to do their jobs? Because, a perfectly running system doesn't help much if the key folks can't use it or aren't there.
That's a really important point. You could have the fanciest tech, but if your team's offline or can't get in,
Yeah,
you're still unavailable. It's bigger than just IT.
totally. And the reality check is normal operations can fail. Even in really well-run places, systems go down, processes break, sometimes a bit, sometimes completely.
And the fallout from that downtime, it can be pretty bad, right? We've all felt the frustration when an app is down, but for a business.
It's way higher stakes. The sources spell it out. Downtime, even a small amount, can mean real money lost. Revenue just stops flowing if you can't make sales or process things.
Right.
Then there's data loss, potentially catastrophic. And customer trust. That erodes fast if you're unreliable. People just, they go somewhere else. You lose customers.
The impact is huge. So how do businesses fight back against this risk? This seems to lead us to business resiliency. What's that about?
Business resiliency. Yeah. Yeah. The sources frame this as the key strategic response. It's how you evaluate that risk of failure and then figure out how to reduce it. Think of it like the master plan for survival.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. How's it defined?
Well, the material describes it as integrating lots of different plans and controls, putting them all together into a central approach.
Okay.
So it's not just one document, it's more like a framework.
A framework that includes
Things like your system availability controls, your disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans, crisis management plans, all pulled together.
Okay, so all those terms we hear, DR, BC, CM, they actually fit under this business resiliency umbrella.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And the ultimate goal, to make sure the business can either keep operating through a disruption or get back on its feet really quickly afterwards without, lasting damage to people, data, or assets. It's about staying viable long term.
So how does a company even start building something like that? Seems like a massive undertaking.
Well, the first steps are pretty fundamental. The sources really stress this. You have to identify your core operational activities first. What absolutely has to keep running for the business to survive? What are those critical processes?
Find the heartbeat of the business.
Good way to put it. Then, once you know what's critical, you assess the threats. What can actually disrupt those core things? Internal risks, external risks. What are the plausible scenarios?
Okay, know what's vital, know what could break it, then what?
Then, management can start building the actual resiliency program, figuring out what capabilities you need to repair things, to restore those vital functions. How fast can you recover? How effectively?
The source material had that graphic, didn't it, showing how these pieces fit together.
Yeah, that visual is helpful. It shows system availability being supported by layers. Business continuity, business resiliency itself, crisis management, disaster recovery, they all work together.
Right, not in isolation.
And underneath all that, you have the various controls, the specific tools, procedures, safeguards you put in place.
And those controls were grouped into categories.
There were. The graphic mentions things like incident response plans, physical and IT infrastructure controls, uninterrupted power supply, UPS, and redundancy and backup strategies. These are the practical boots-on-the-ground things that make the bigger plans work.
Got it. So wrapping up this first part, availability is being able to function, tech, and people. The risk is failure with big consequences. Business resiliency is the strategy to manage that risk, integrating plans like DR, BC, and CM.
Which are distinct components focusing on specific recovery aspects. Resiliency is the overall goal. DRBCCM are major parts of achieving it, built on controls and starting with identifying what's critical and what the threats are.
Okay, makes sense. Let's dive into those pillars then. DR, BC, and CM, starting with disaster recovery, DIR. What's the specific focus there?
Right, DIR. It's a huge piece of business resiliency, but it's got a very specific job. Restoring and keeping information technology functions going after a major disruption.
What counts as major disruption here? Is it just any server hiccup?
Generally, no. The sources point out DR is needed when the damage is bad enough that you can't quickly get IT processing back online at your main site. We're talking significant destruction program files, data, maybe even the physical computers themselves are damaged or gone. The site might literally not exist anymore after a fire or flood.
Okay, so IT recovery, when your primary tech environment is seriously messed up or unusable, what are the key steps to building a DR plan?
The sources lay out 5 main steps. 1, assess the risks. What could actually happen? Natural disasters, tech failures, human actions. What could realistically hit your IT infrastructure where it lives?
Pinpoint the tech threats.
Exactly. 2, identify mission-critical applications and data. What IT stuff absolutely positively has to work for the business to even function at a basic level. What can't you live without?
What needs to come back first, or ideally never go down?
Precisely. 3, develop a plan for handling those critical things. How specifically are you going to restore them or switch them over? Step-by-step procedures.
The actual how-to for the important tech?
4, determine who's responsible for what. Who's in charge during recovery? Who executes which part of the plan? You need clear roles, especially in a crisis.
Know your job when things get chaotic.
And 5, maybe the most important, test the plan. Seriously, a DR plan you haven't tested, it's just theory. You need drills, simulations to make sure it actually works, find the problems, and get people trained.
Yeah, you don't want the first test run to be during the real thing.
Definitely not. Testing proves it works and builds confidence. Now, a really big part of step 3, developing the plan, is deciding where IT operations will happen if the main site is gone. The sources talk about 3 main options for alternative processing facilities or recovery sites.
The classic cold, warm, and hot sites. These sound like different levels of readiness and probably cost. How do they stack up based on the source details? They're all off-site, right?
Right. All off-site. Let's start with the cold site. This is your most basic and cheapest option. It's a location with the physical necessities, building, power, cooling, maybe network hookups ready, but critically, there's NO computer equipment installed.
So an empty, prepared shell.
Pretty much. Think of it like a data center room, ready to go, but empty. If disaster hits, you've got a place, but you need to get all the servers, storage, network gear, everything delivered, installed, configured.
Sounds like that would take a while to get running.
It does. The source suggests usually 1 to 3 days, maybe even longer. Depends on how complex your setup is and how fast you can get the hardware. Companies using cold sites usually plan on using fairly standard, easy-to-get hardware.
Okay, cold site. Cheap, empty, takes days to get operational, needs hardware brought in. What's the next level up? The warm site.
The warm site, yeah. It's the middle ground, also off-site. According to the material, a warm site does have some hardware already installed, maybe some basic network connections set up.
Hardware, enough to just start working.
Usually not fully. It'll likely have the core infrastructure, maybe some servers, some network gear, but it probably won't have all the specific configured machines you need like a hop site or your primary site would. You'll likely still need to bring in certain servers, load your specific software, restore data.
So it gives you a head start over a cold site, but it's not instant.
Exactly. The time to get operational, the source says, is somewhere between 0 and 3 days. Depends heavily on what's already there versus what you need to bring in and set up.
And the cost. More than cold, less than hot.
You got it. More than cold because you're paying for that pre-installed gear and its upkeep, but less than a hot site. It's a compromise for businesses that need faster recovery than cold provides, but maybe can't justify a full hot site for everything.
Which leads us to the hot site. Sounds like the top tier, ready to roll option.
It is. A hot site is an offsite facility that's fully equipped, fully configured, ready to take over your company's IT processing basically immediately.
Immediately. How do they manage that?
Well, hot sites are pre-wired. They have all the necessary computer hardware servers, storage, networking, often matching, or very similar to your primary site. They even usually have office space, phones, desks for the staff who need to work there.
Like a duplicate IT department waiting in the wings. What about the data? How is it kept up to date?
Good question. Backup copies of the critical data and programs are kept either right at the hot site or very close by with fast connections. They often use techniques like constant data replication or mirroring, which we'll touch on more later, to keep the data at the hot site almost perfectly in sync with the live site.
So if the main site goes down, you can pretty much flip a switch and start running from the hot site almost instantly.
That's the idea, yes. Time to operational is listed as immediate. It's the fastest recovery option of the three.
And I bet the price tag reflects that speed.
Oh, absolutely. Hot sites are the most expensive. You're essentially paying for a fully redundant, ready-to-go facility that just sits there, waiting, staying updated, just in case.
Okay, so summarizing the trade-offs from that matrix. Cold is cheapest, takes days, needs hardware. Warm is mid-cost, mid-time, 0-3 days. Some gear pre-installed. Hot is most expensive, but immediately operational with everything ready. It's really about balancing costs against how fast you need IT back your recovery time objective.
Exactly. That choice is heavily driven by those critical applications you identified and how quickly the business absolutely needs them back online. We'll talk more about those metrics later.
Okay, DR handles the IT recovery. What about business continuity plans, BCPs? The source says they're broader.
They are. While DR is focused squarely on IT, BCPs take a wider view. A business continuity plan is about keeping the whole business running, or getting it running again during and after a disaster, not just fixing the tech.
Ah, so it's the whole car, not just the engine.
Nice analogy.
Yeah.
A BCP covers contingency plans for all critical business processes. That goes beyond IT to things like, where do people work if the office is gone? How do HR functions continue? How do you manage supply chains? How do you keep talking to customers and suppliers?
So if the building's gone, the BCP helps figure out where people go, how they work, how they get what they need, even non-IT stuff, and how the business continues to interact with the outside world.
Precisely. The main goal is to keep the business going, or get it back quickly, looking at all aspects, people, process, tech.
What are the key steps or things to consider when putting together a BCP?
Similar to DR, it starts with identifying the critical business processes. What functions are essential for survival? Then, what are the risks to those processes? But a really key step for BCP is figuring out the acceptable downtime for each critical process. How long can payroll be down, or customer service,
Right.
or manufacturing, before things get really bad?
That acceptable downtime sounds like a critical number to figure out.
It really is. It drives a lot of the planning. Based on those time limits, you then develop your mitigation and contingency plans, the specific actions, resources, workarounds needed to keep those processes going or recover them within those acceptable timeframes.
The source also mentioned auditors looking at BCP testing, especially in SOC2 audits. What's that about?
Yeah, under the SOC2 availability criteria, auditors often check if the company actually tests its BCPs. They want to see it's not just a document collecting dust.
What are they looking for specifically in that testing?
Well, the source says they check a few things. Was the plan based on realistic scenarios? Did it focus on the stuff that could really hurt the company if it failed? Did the test consider situations where key people might be missing? And importantly, was the plan updated based on what they learned from the tests?
So is it realistic, focused? Does it consider people? And is it actually improved based on practice?
Exactly. The auditor wants proof it's a credible, tested strategy. The source uses that Health One Inc. example to show this in action.
Right. Tell us about Health One again.
Okay, Health One, health insurance company in a hurricane zone. They do an annual BCP review. A big risk they saw was the remote workforce. During storms, lots of remote folks lose internet, can't work from home. That hits customer service, claims processing, critical stuff.
Yeah, a common issue now with remote work.
Totally. So their BCP solution, they set up a designated backup facility safe, operational for a core team of essential people. This place is meant to have reliable internet and phones, even when local services are down.
A physical fallback spot for key connected staff.
Yep. And crucially, they'd already moved their critical systems to the cloud years before. That was a big enabler.
Because the apps aren't tied to the main office anymore.
Right. So Health One's BCP test, as described, was to see if that relocated core team could actually get to the backup site and successfully resume the vital business operations using those cloud systems. It tested the relocation, the facility, the people, the tech access, the whole chain.
That's a perfect example of a BCP pulling together people, places, and tech access to handle a specific threat like a regional outage from a swarm. It's clearly about the business continuity.
Exactly. Shows that broader focus.
Okay, DR for IT, BCP for overall operations. What's the third one? Crisis management plans, CMPs.
Right, CMPs. These are geared towards those really big, unexpected, nasty incidents. True crises that could seriously harm the organization and its stakeholders. Think events that go way beyond normal disruptions, things that could trash the company's reputation or even threaten its existence.
Like a massive data breach, a catastrophic product failure, a huge natural disaster hitting multiple locations, maybe a major scandal.
Yeah, the source defines a crisis broadly as large-scale and unexpected. These situations are super stressful, chaotic. You need to make big decisions fast, often without clear rules or past experience to guide you. That's why the plan is so important. It provides structure when everything feels like it's falling apart.
The goals seem pretty clear in that light.
They are, basically. Lessen the damage, protect people, employees, customers, public safeguard the company's reputation, and get back to normal as fast as possible.
What should a good CMP actually cover? What policies or elements need to be in there?
The source highlights several key things. First, assess potential crises. What are the worst plausible scenarios for your organization? And have defined response procedures for them.
Plan for the big nightmares.
Then, clear implementation steps. When a crisis hits, what exactly do management and employees do? Who activates the plan? How?
The playbook for code red.
A CMP should also designate a crisis response command center. Could be a physical room or virtual, but it's the central hub for coordination and communication during the crisis.
One place where decisions are made and info flows from.
Absolutely vital. Clear roles and responsibilities. Who has the final say on critical decisions? What's everyone's specific job during the crisis? No ambiguity allowed when things are moving fast.
Everyone knows their part.
Communication lines, internal and external, are also key. How does info move inside the company? And just as important, how do you talk to the outside world, media, customers, regulators? Managing the message is crucial for reputation.
Controlling the narrative.
And finally, training. People need to be trained on the CMP so they know the procedures and what's expected of them if a crisis occurs.
So crisis management is about having the immediate high-stakes response structured for those sudden, potentially devastating events. It sounds like it would work alongside DR and BCP to manage the fallout and recovery.
That's right. Going back to that passkey idea from the source, business resiliency is the big strategy integrating everything. DR is the plan for IT recovery. BCP is the plan for overall business operations continuity. And CMP is the plan for managing the immediate response to major crises. They're distinct, but they all fit together under that resiliency umbrella.
Okay, that structure really clicks now, seeing how each has its lane but contributes to the overall goal of being resilient.
Yeah, it shows you need multiple layers. And a really critical piece of building that whole program is doing a thorough analysis before anything happens, understanding the potential impacts.
Which brings us neatly to the business impact analysis, the BIA. What's its role exactly?
The BIA is fundamental. It's the process you use to systematically figure out which business units, departments, processes are absolutely essential for the company to survive. And critically, to understand the impact on the organization if those essential things fail or get disrupted.
So figuring out what you absolutely can't live without and how bad it would hurt if they stopped working.
That's it, exactly. The BIA tells you things like, how quickly do these essential parts need to be back up and running? What are their recovery time needs? And what resources, tech, people, facilities do they need to get back online?
I imagine that's not always simple. Different departments must have unique requirements.
Oh, yeah. The sources mention things that make it complex. Maybe a department needs special hardware or software, or they're in a risky location, or they depend heavily on a third-party vendor whose own resilience matters.
The BIA also helps quantify the impact, right? Using high, medium, and low categories. What do those mean?
Right, those categories help prioritize. High impact means if that process or resource goes down, the source says the department cannot operate at all. Recovery cost is likely high, and it's a definite hit to objectives or reputation. Basically, a showstopper.
Total failure, big cost, major damage, top priority.
Definitely. Medium or moderate impact means the department might be able to function partially for a short time, maybe a few days. There'd be some recovery cost, and it might hurt objectives or reputation, but it's not as severe or certain as high.
Partial function for a bit,
Yeah.
some cost, potential damage, significant, but maybe not fatal right away.
And low impact. If that process or resource is disrupted, the department could probably operate for quite a while without it, maybe using workarounds. Recovery cost is low, and the effect on goals or reputation would likely just be noticeable, not a major problem.
Okay, so high needs urgent planning, medium needs attention, low is less critical. That makes prioritization much clearer.
It does. And it feeds directly into setting recovery priorities.
Yes.
So let's walk through the 7 steps of the BIA process itself, as the source lays them out.
Step 1. Establish the BIA approach. What's involved there?
This is setting the stage, getting everyone, especially leadership, to agree on how the BIA will be done.
Yeah.
What kinds of impacts are we looking at? Financial, reputation, operational? What are the exact criteria for high, medium, low? What timeframes will we analyze impact over, like after 4 hours down, 24 hours, 3 days? You need agreed upon rules before you start.
Define the rules before playing the game. Makes sense.
Exactly. Step 2, identify critical resources. This is the deep dive. Defining the critical functions across the business and then identifying the specific IT systems, apps, infrastructure, maybe even facilities or key people that those functions depend on. This is where you find your vulnerabilities, often done through interviews and looking at documentation.
Mapping functions to the assets they need.
Step 3, define disruption impacts. For each critical thing you identified, you figure out the impact if it breaks and how that impact changes over time. How does it go from maybe low impact after an hour to high impact after a day? You look at quantitative effects, lost money, fines, and qualitative ones, bad PR, low morale. And consider different threat types, natural, human error, attacks.
Describing the pain and how it gets worse.
Step 4, this is a big one, where the numbers come in. Estimate losses. Management figures out potential disruptive events and how likely they are. That's the annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO. Then they quantify the potential financial hit using specific calculations.
This sounds like that Build Tech Inc. example. Let's use that to make these calculations concrete.
Perfect. Build Tech, manufacturing company doing a BIA, looking at the risk of their data center partially flooding.
Okay, the details were data center value, $5 million. The flood type they're worried about would affect 40% of that value. And historically, or based on analysis, this kind of flood happens about once every 20 years.
Right. Goal. Find the annualized cost of this risk. First metric, annualized rate of occurrence, ARO.
ARO, how often it happens per year?
Yep, once every 20 years. So the math is 1 occurrence divided by 20 years.
120 equals 0.05 ARO, so a 5% chance in any given year.
Exactly, the long-term average frequency. Next metric, exposure factor, EF.
EF, the percentage of the asset's value lost in the event.
Correct. Build Tech said 40% of the data center value would be impacted. So EF is 40%, or 0.40.
Okay, ARO, how often? EF, how much damage percent-wise? What's next?
Single loss expectancy, SLE. This is the estimated cost of one flood event. Formula, EF times asset value.
So 40% of $5 million, $0.405,000.
Which comes out to $2 million.
Yeah.
The SLE for this flood is $2 million. That's the cost if it happens once.
Wow, $2 million each time.
Yeah.
It only happens every 20 years or so. How do we get the average annual cost?
That's the final metric. Annualized loss expectancy, ALE. This figures the expected cost per year, considering both the cost per event, SLE, and how often it happens, ARO. Formula, SLE times ARO.
So $2 million SLE times 0.05 ARO
It's exactly $2,000,000.05.
is $100,000.
That's the ALE. The annualized loss expectancy for this specific flood risk at Build Tech is $100,000.
That's really powerful. It takes this potential disaster and turns it into an expected annual cost figure. Instead of just flooding is bad, it's this flood risk costs us, on average, $100 TAs a year.
Precisely. And that $100 KALE gives them a concrete number for making decisions. They can look at ways to prevent or lessen the flood damage, maybe raised floors, better drainage, moving gear, and compare the cost of those fixes to the $100 expected annual loss.
If a fix costs less than $100 a year and significantly reduces the risk, it probably makes financial sense.
It really shows the practical value of the VIA quantifying risk to justify spending on resilience.
Gives you the data to make the case for controls and plans. Okay, back to the BIA steps. Step 5. Establish recovery priorities.
This is where those impact categories and acceptable downtimes really matter. Yes. Based on the impacts you defined, especially how quickly they get worse, management has to decide what gets recovered first. Things with a low maximum tolerable downtime, MTD stuff, that causes big problems if it's down even for a short time, get higher priority than things that can wait longer.
So the BIA helps you rank the recovery queue.
Exactly. Step 6. Create the BIA report. All the findings get compiled. You might have reports for departments, business units, products, but they should cover all the critical processes, risks, impacts. These usually roll up into a company-wide BIA report.
Documenting everything you learned about your weak spots and their potential cost.
And the last step, step 7, implement BIA recommendations. The report isn't the end goal. It's the starting point for action. Senior management reviews it, identifies the biggest threats based on the analysis, and then decides on and implements actions, maybe new tech, change processes, or improving those DR, BCP, or CMP plans we talked about.
So the BIA provides the why and what for building the actual resiliency plans. It tells you what needs protecting most.
Exactly. It's the intelligence gathering that underpins the whole strategy.
Okay, we've covered the plans, DR, BC, CM, and the analysis, BIA. Now let's get into the practical controls and strategies used to actually achieve system availability and support recovery.
Right, the tools and techniques. Before we list them, just a quick reminder of the risks they're fighting. Things like IT infrastructure failure, hardware dying, software bugs, network problems, maybe from old gear, lack of maintenance, malware, or physical damage like fires, floods, attacks, even denial of service.
Basically, anything making the tech stop or become unreachable. Expert speaker. Then there's insufficient capacity or resources. Not enough computing power, storage, bandwidth, or maybe not enough skilled people to manage it all leads to slowdowns, especially under load, trying to squeeze too much out of the system or staff.
And as we said, just not having a proper business resiliency program is itself a huge risk. Without the plans, recovery is slow, chaotic, maybe impossible.
So those are the enemies. What are the weapons? What specific IT processes and controls help keep things running?
Well, the DR, BCP, and CMP plans themselves are part of the controls documented procedures. But there are also specific IT techniques and categories of controls for the technical and physical side.
Like what? What techniques are mentioned?
One is mirroring, usually for data storage, like databases. It means making an exact real-time copy of your data onto a different machine or storage unit, often nearby.
Two identical copies being updated at the same time on separate hardware.
Pretty much. The goal is instant redundancy. If the main one fails, you switch to the mirror with almost no data loss or downtime.
Okay, local real-time duplication. What about replication?
Replication also copies data, but it usually means copying between different databases or systems in different locations, often geographically separate data centers, maybe different cloud regions.
So like mirroring, but over distance.
Kind of. Data gets copied from the primary site to a secondary site. If the primary goes dark, the secondary site can take over using a fairly recent copy of the data. Enables recovery at another location.
Another technique mentioned was secondary internet sources. That feels very practical.
It really is. If your internet connection is your lifeline, losing it is a big deal, even if the power stays on. So you have a backup connection, maybe from a different provider, using different tech like fiber plus cable, or even using cellular.
Like a backup ISP line.
Or using cellular hotspots temporarily. The force mentions using phones or dedicated wireless adapters that can even plug into your network gear, keeping things running over cellular if the main line drops. It's about keeping that connection open.
Multiple paths to the outside world. Okay, beyond specific techniques, the source grouped controls into categories.
Yeah, the main ones listed are physical controls, IT infrastructure controls, uninterrupted power supply, UPS, redundancy, and system backup.
Let's take those one by one. Physical controls.
That's about protecting the actual hardware and the places it lives, preventing unauthorized access locks, guards, cameras,
Keeping bad actors out.
and protecting against the environment. Fire alarms, sprinklers. Smart facility design like raised floors in data centers to avoid flood damage, or enough air conditioning so servers don't overheat, which is a surprisingly common failure point.
Guarding against physical harm and environmental issues. What about IT infrastructure controls?
These are more about fighting off digital threats and system weaknesses. Things like having continuous anti-malware running and a really solid patch management process to keep software up to date and secure.
Keeping the digital side clean and patched.
Also, regularly reviewing your IT components to get rid of old tech before it fails. Network security like firewalls, intrusion detection systems. And strong access controls, making sure only the right people can access the right systems and data. Prevents mistakes and insider threats.
Securing the software, network, and who gets in. Got it. Uninterrupted power supply, UPS.
Ah, the UPS. crucial for immediate power continuity. It's basically a big battery backup. Its main job is to stop systems from crashing hard during a power outage, which can corrupt data or damage hardware.
How does it work when the power goes out?
It detects the power loss instantly and switches the connected gear over to its battery seamlessly. No interruption.
Buys you critical time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and the source makes this clear, it's not a generator. The battery only lasts so long, usually minutes. Enough time to shut systems down gracefully, saving data, or to allow a proper backup generator to kick in and take over for the longer term. It's a short bridge.
Okay, a vital bridge for safe shutdown or generator startup. What about redundancy?
Redundancy just means having duplicates of critical stuff. If one fails, the backup takes over automatically. Could be hardware, software, storage. Like having two network routers, if the main one dies, traffic flows through the backup.
Built-in spares, ready to go.
Yep. A classic example for storage is RAID redundant arrays of independent drives. It spreads data across multiple hard drives, so if one drive fails, which they do, you can still get your data from the others. Prevents data loss from a single disk failure.
Standard practice for storage availability. Which brings us to system backup. Absolutely key for recovery. The source went into detail on the types.
Yeah, backups are fundamental for getting lost data back, part of any resiliency plan. The sources focus on three main types: full, incremental, and differential.
Let's start with full backup. What's that?
Full backup is exactly what it sounds like. An exact copy of the entire database or system you're backing up. Every single bit.
The whole snapshot.
Right. Because it copies everything, it usually takes the longest time to create. So companies often don't do them every day, maybe weekly, supplementing with other types in between.
Slow to create. But how about restoring from one?
Restoring from a full backup is usually the fastest way to recover.
Yeah.
You just need that one file, the full backup file, restore it, and you're back to how things were when it was taken.
Okay, slow create, fast restore. What's an incremental backup then?
Incremental only copies data that's changed since the last backup, whatever type that was. So after a full-on Sunday, Monday's incremental just gets Monday's changes, Tuesday's just gets Tuesday's changes since Monday's backup. Each file is just the new stuff.
Sounds much quicker to make each day.
It is. Very fast creation time because you're only copying a little bit of data. But the trade-off is restoration time.
Why is restoring from incrementals slower?
Because to get everything back, you need the last full backup plus every single incremental backup taken since then, applied in the right order. So if you had a full on Sunday and daily incrementals, to restore to Friday, you need Sunday's full, then Monday's incremental, then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Restoring and applying all those files sequentially takes time and is more complex.
Fast create, potentially slow and fiddly restore. How about differential backup?
Differential copies all the changes made since the last full backup. It's cumulative.
Cumulative. How does that work daily?
Okay, full backup Sunday. Monday's differential gets Monday's changes. Tuesday's differential gets all changes from Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday's gets all changes from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Each differential file grows, containing everything new since the last full.
Ah, so the differential file gets bigger each day until the next full backup.
Exactly. Creation time is faster than a full, but usually slower than an incremental, except maybe the first day. It copies more data each day.
And restoration, how does that compare?
Faster and simpler than incremental. To restore fully, you only need two files: the last full backup and the most recent differential backup. Since that last differential has all the changes since the full, you just restore the full, then apply that one differential file. Done.
Okay, create time is between full and incremental. Restore time is also between full and incremental. Faster than incremental, slower than full.
That's the trade-off in a nutshell. Companies pick based on their needs. Need super fast recovery. More fulls or differentials might be better. Super tight backup window overnight. Incrementals might be the only option, accepting slower recovery. The source had that university IT director example.
Right, a university would have tons of data.
Massive amounts. Their strategy, as described, was a balance. Full backups twice a month takes hours. Then daily incremental backups in between to capture changes more often.
So they trade off long backup times twice a month for fast dailies, knowing recovery involves applying multiple incrementals.
It's a common way to handle huge data volumes while still having frequent recovery points. If they need to restore, they grab the last full and apply the needed incrementals.
This whole discussion on controls physical, power, redundancy, backups really shows the layers needed for availability. And the source tied this back to how auditors check these things, like in a SOC2 audit for availability.
Yeah, the SOC2 availability criteria is all about whether the system is available as promised. If a company says, we guarantee X uptime, the audit checks if they have the controls to back that up.
What specific controls do auditors look at for availability?
The criteria cover things like infrastructure capacity and monitoring, the backup and recovery infrastructure itself, and testing of the recovery plans.
So for capacity and monitoring, what evidence do they need?
They want to see proof the company is actually watching its system load. Outputs from monitoring tools showing CPU, memory, disk usage, network traffic. The source warns if you're not monitoring, you can hit capacity limits unexpectedly, causing outages. Simple as that.
Gotta see problems coming. What about backups and recovery infrastructure?
Auditors check. Do you actually have the backup systems? Do you have the off-site storage, the recovery sites, the cloud services you claim? Is it working? If that infrastructure isn't really there or isn't adequate, the risk of major data loss and super long downtime is huge.
And testing recovery plans. We know testing is crucial.
Absolutely, and auditors demand proof. They'll ask for the DR and BCP documents, evidence of recent tests, when, what scenario, who participated, and critically, the results. What went wrong? What did you fix?
Proof that the plans aren't just paper tigers.
Exactly. The risk if you don't test. Having plans that just plain don't work when you need them. No clear procedure to follow means longer downtime, more damage.
So a SOC2 availability audit is basically verifying that a company is doing all the core things we've discussed. Monitoring, having the recovery gear ready, and practicing their response. An independent check.
Pretty much. It gives stakeholders some assurance that the company takes this stuff seriously and has controls aligned with good practices.
Okay, we've hit the planning, the analysis, the controls, the auditing. How do companies actually measure how well they're doing? What are the key metrics for availability and risk performance?
Metrics are essential for tracking performance, seeing trends, and often for holding service providers accountable through service level agreements, SLAs.
SLAs often have uptime guarantees, right? Like 99.9%.
Exactly. The source lists several key metrics. Agreed service time, AST, that's the total time a system is supposed to be running in a period, defined in the SLA. Downtime, DT, is the actual time it wasn't running unexpectedly. Availability percentage is often calculated from those. AST, DT, AST 100%.
Okay, AST, planned uptime, DT, actual downtime. What about maximum tolerable downtime, MTD?
MTD is a big one, set during planning, often via the BIA. It's the absolute longest a specific process or system can be down before the business suffers really significant, maybe irreparable harm. It's the drop-dead recovery deadline.
The point of no return, downtime-wise.
Kinda, yeah. Then there's recovery point objective, RPO. This one's about data loss. It defines the maximum amount of data you can afford to lose, usually measured in time. Like, we can't lose more than the last 15 minutes of data. It's a target. Less critical apps might have a higher RPO. Maybe losing an hour of data is okay.
How much data loss is acceptable? That's RPO, a target.
Correct. And related is recovery time objective, RTO. This defines the maximum time it should take to get a system or process back to a specific operational state after it fails. Also a target, like this critical system must have an RTO of 4 hours, meaning the plan is to get it back online within 4 hours.
How fast do we need to be back? That's RTO, another target. So RPO is about acceptable data loss, RTO is about acceptable recovery speed. These must heavily influence your DR site and backup choices.
Oh, absolutely. Very low RPO. Need frequent backups or replication. Very low RTO. Need a hot site. These targets, often driven by the BIA, dictate the technical solutions.
What other metrics were mentioned? Mean time to repair, MTTR.
MTTR is a measurement of past performance. It's the average time it took to fix a specific type of failure over a period. It's related to RTO, but MTTR is an average of actual repair times, not a target for full recovery from a disaster.
Okay, average fix time based on history.
And then recovery time actual, RTA, and recovery point actual, RPA. RTA is how long it actually took to recover from a specific incident. You compare RTA to your RTO target. Did you meet it?
RTA is the real result versus the RTO goal.
Yep. And RPA relates to the state of the data after recovery. How much data did you actually lose compared to your RPO target? Or how current was the system?
Got it. So RPO and RTO are the key targets set in planning, informed by the BIA. MTD is the ultimate pain threshold. And MTTR, RTA, RPA are measurements of actual performance against those targets.
The difference between planning targets and performance measurements is crucial for understanding how companies manage and evaluate availability and resilience.
Wow. This has been a really thorough deep dive. We've kind of mapped the whole territory, haven't we? Started with availability, the basic need, and the big strategy of business resiliency.
Then unpack the specific plans like DR for tech,
hmm
BCP for the whole business operation, and CMP for those major crises.
We dug into the analysis with the BIA, seeing how you find critical functions, quantify risks with things like ALE, and set priorities.
And then we got practical, looking at the controls, physical security, UKS, redundancy, the different backup types like full, incremental, differential, and their trade-offs.
And finally, looked at how you measure success with metrics like RTO and RPO, and how auditors even check up on all this through things like SOC2. It's a lot, but clearly essential for any modern organization.
It really underscores that staying operational, bouncing back from trouble, isn't accidental. It takes deliberate planning, analysis, technical controls, documented procedures, the whole 9 yards.
So, for you listening, thinking about all the systems and services you rely on every day, knowing the kind of effort that goes into planning for failure, identifying what's critical, estimating losses, setting recovery goals.
It kind of leads to a final thought, doesn't it? With all this complex planning for availability, resiliency, and disaster recovery that organizations undertake, what part of it strikes you as the most surprisingly critical element? And does knowing about this change how you think about the reliability of the services you use, or even the systems in your own life?
Something to chew on as we wrap up today's deep dive.